Unfortunately, this is the third video I've had to make about the Xbox situation because apparently the layoffs are not yet done. Expect more bad news in the coming days, according to several reports. Bloomberg's Jason Schrier has a pretty damning report about what we can expect over the coming days from the Xbox brand. He says new Xbox still isn't done cutting costs, sent voluntary buyout offers to some ZeniMax staff. Why were Arkane Austin and Tango Gameworks closed? Bad timing, perhaps. Activision purchase has ramped up scrutiny on Xbox, and much more. Here's my latest. He goes on to write link to this article where he has a pretty damning report about Xbox's future plans. Microsoft's Xbox is planning more cuts after studio closings. Xbox is offering voluntary severance agreements to producers, QA testers, and other staff at ZeniMax as part of a broader cost-cutting initiative. The sudden closure of several video game studios at Microsoft Corp's Xbox division was the result of a widespread cost-cutting initiative that still isn't finished. This week, Xbox began offering voluntary severance agreements to producers, QA testers, and other staff at ZeniMax, which it purchased in 2020 for $7.5 billion, according to people familiar with the company's plans. Others across the Xbox organization have been told that more cuts are on the way. We're going to get to the employee reaction and overall internal sentiment because other statements have been made that are absolutely baffling to many people, including those that were just laid off who were making those types of games that they're looking to produce. Anyway, I'll get to that in a second. Speaking about the closures more broadly, Booty said that the company's studios had been spread too thin like peanut butter on bread, and that leaders across the division had felt understaffed. They decided to close these studios to free up resources elsewhere, he said. Like I said, hearing a statement like that in a town hall, and you're working on Clockwork Revolution, or you're working on South of Midnight, two games that I think are very interesting and compelling to the audience, but aren't AAA, they aren't Doom, they aren't World of Warcraft, they aren't the major IP that Xbox currently has at their disposal. You've got to be wondering what that means for the future of these other brands, and if there are more layoffs coming, has to be concerning to any of the smaller teams at the company. Booty added that the shutdown of subsidiary Arkane Austin, the longtime developers of games such as Prey, was not connected to the performance of its new multiplayer game Redfall, a critical and commercial flop. I mean, obviously that's just not true. If Redfall had been a massive success, then of course that studio would have been looked at more fondly and potentially passed over. So yes, Redfall absolutely contributed to the closing of that studio. But according to Schrier, here's what he says has been in his report. Before its closure, Arkane had been looking to return to its roots by pitching a new single-player immersive sim game, such as a new entry in the Dishonored series, according to the people familiar. Now, the reason Jason outlined online for the closure is because basically they were in pitch mode and they weren't actively building anything, so it seems like they just decided to shut the studio because they're like, oh, you need more people? Well, we can't do that right now. We're going to close your studio. Jill Braff, head of ZeniMax Studios, said in the town hall that she hoped the reorganization would allow the division, which also develops Fallout and Doom, to put more focus on fewer projects. It's hard to support 9 studios all across the world with a lean central team with an ever-growing plate of things to do, she said, according to the audio of the meeting reviewed by Bloomberg. I think we were about to topple over. So obviously ZeniMax has taken on way more than they can handle, and they have just decided to do sweeping changes to several of their studios, which involves closure. Both Tango and Arkane released games last year and were looking to hire additional staff as they pitched new projects, which Booty and Braff suggested was the main factor behind their closures. Shinji Mikami, Tango's founder and studio head, departed last year. Now, real quick, I was going to cover off on it later, but some people have talked about how there's this rumor that Shinji Mikami took a bunch of staff, and Nib sort of sums it up here. There's a rumor from Reddit, lol, and shared by Xbox fan accounts that Tango Gameworks closed due to Shinji Mikami taking most of the staff with him. Yun and M. Watanabe, cinematics director at Tango, who's credited to Hi-Fi Rush, confirms it's false. And basically, here is the post where someone is saying, wait a minute, it appears that Shinji Mikami took most of the Tango Gameworks staff with him to a new studio. Now things are making sense. However, a person who worked there says that's completely false. So that is not true. If you see that going around, which I have, and I was curious about it, that seems to have been deemed not true. Xbox promised to support less sprawling creative titles such as Hi-Fi Rush with smaller budgets and lower sales expectations. It didn't matter if a game sold tens of millions of copies as long as it helped bolster the Game Pass library. The problem is the subscription rate is not growing. Matt Piscatella, who has been sourced a lot about why all this is happening, points to a slow increase in Xbox Game Pass subscriptions. And it stalled March 2024. Non-mobile video game subscription spending was only up 1% versus the April 2023 figures that got me to post the below last year. Growth of video game subscriptions spending has stalled, according to Circana's Game Market Dynamics reporting. April 23 sub spending in the US was only up 2% higher than April 22. Finding new subscribers beyond the console ownership base has proven very difficult thus far. So clearly it's not growing in the PC space and other spaces. Now, Brad Hildebrand, I actually know Brad. He worked with us. He worked with me on several projects for like BioWare and on some projects was just laid off. And he had some insight into what he thinks is happening here. Alan Freely linked to it, and I was surprised to see Brad today, but it is good to see him. He's a good guy. There are two reasons why those Bethesda studios closed, and neither of them have anything to do with Bethesda directly, Game Pass and Activision. The biggest paradox with Game Pass is that basically every game that launches on the service badly misses its sales goals. Makes sense though, why pay full price to buy a game when you can play it for free as part of your subscription? This is accounted for somewhat by attributing portions of revenue to top performing Game Pass games every month. But there are factors working against games, namely the fact that most games don't stay at the top of the chart for more than a month or two, and also that Game Pass growth has stagnated. So games like Hi-Fi Rush, which is incredible, mind you, gets a very small bump in revenue from being the hot Game Pass game for a month, then it falls off a cliff when everyone moves on to the next thing. Poor Redfall had it even worse. Since it launched so rough, it never had a chance. This system was fine for a while when Game Pass was growing like gangbusters, but now it's slowed way down and the amount of revenue it's attributing to games isn't keeping up with the budgets to make them. But all that wouldn't have mattered even 3 or 4 years ago, because back then Xbox was basically a rounding error on Microsoft's books. The division made some money, but more importantly, it didn't cost that much and other parts of the business easily covered the gap. Then Xbox went on a buying spree and spent a lot of money on Bethesda, but orders of magnitude more on Activision. Now the Eye of Sauron has turned, and Xbox is expected to start making that $70 billion back, or at least cut expenses to the bone and then some while they try. That brings us back to Game Pass. So far, the big bets on driving new subscriptions, Redfall, Starfield, hasn't spurred near enough growth, and there's not much on the horizon that is likely to restart the momentum. The best bet is COD, but do you really risk the guaranteed sales revenue that franchise brings by putting it on Game Pass on day one and potentially lose massive sales? I don't know what the plans are, but either you put it on Game Pass and lose money, or you don't, and the subscribers revolt because they think that's what they signed up for, and they would revolt because they think that's exactly what he said. That's what people think they signed up for. COD will be fine though, as will the other mega studios with huge IPs, but you're seeing the impact. All those smaller studios making really interesting games are going to fall away simply because, as good as games like Hi-Fi Rush are, they're never going to make enough money to make up that $70 billion hole that Xbox now has to dig itself out of. They also sent Brad some bags 4 days after they laid him off that had the Xbox branding on him, and he didn't really know how to feel about that, which is, come on. Like, what are you doing? Continuing on, though, you might have seen this Verge report. Before I get to that, if you like my roundups of news, hit that subscribe button, hit that bell to know when my content goes live, hit that like button. Obviously, I like doing this for y'all, even on bad days like this. So that's a good way to support if you're just watching. Tom Warren said, "We need smaller games that give us prestige and awards," said Matt Botty, head of Xbox Games, in a Microsoft town hall today. Now, there's some people who are arguing that, okay, Hi-Fi Rush wasn't a small game. It took too many years to develop. What he is discussing is something like Vampire Survivors, I would imagine, or apparently Pentiment didn't take that long to develop. So he's talking about shorter development cycles, like a few years versus the 5 years that this game took. But even the former creative director at Tango Gameworks simply had this as a reaction, which I think is quite fitting. And previously he said, "So this is how it ends. Unfortunately, I don't quite have the words, but at least thank you to everyone who supported us." I think this is an apt reaction to this story from The Verge. Microsoft says it needs games like Hi-Fi Rush the day after killing its studio. Separately, there's also a clip I'm going to play where Phil Spencer discussed smaller games making their way to other platforms, and he describes them as small. Let's take a listen. Got to change my audio setting here. Sorry.
I'd say two of the other games are smaller games that were never really meant to be built as kind of platform exclusives and all the fanfare that goes around that, but games that our teams really wanted to go build, that we love supporting creative endeavors across our studios regardless of size. And as they've realized their full potential on Xbox and PC, we see an opportunity to utilize the other platforms as a place to just drive more business value out of those games, allowing us to invest in maybe future iterations of those, so sequels to those, or just other games like that in our portfolio.
Fast forward not even that much longer later, and they're discussing bringing Hellblade 2 over to other platforms also. Now, when you talk about a smaller game within the Xbox ecosystem, you got to understand why the creative director, who's obviously having a reaction to this, would have that reaction. It's because everybody sees Hi-Fi Rush as a smaller game. Xbox has sort of alluded to the fact that they feel like it's a smaller game. It does not have the staffing that a Call of Duty, a Diablo, a Halo Infinite, or an Overwatch even would have, or World of Warcraft. Like, those are bigger teams. And when you see something like Hi-Fi Rush come along, I counted the picture that's going around online. There's fewer than 100 people on that team. So if they were told or given the opportunity to make something on a smaller scale using the Hi-Fi Rush IP, I have to imagine they could have accomplished that in a shorter time period, and then would have been able to reevaluate whether or not a Hi-Fi Rush 2, which they were pitching, would be possible. So it's incredibly frustrating to see people argue about whether or not the game is big. When you're talking about the $3 trillion company, Hi-Fi Rush is a small game. I don't care what anybody says. And when you compare it to the other IP that they have under their brand, yes, it's smaller. Anyway, Matt Botty, head of Xbox Game Studios, held a town hall to discuss the division's future goals. "We need smaller games that give us prestige and awards," Botty told employees, according to internal remarks shared with The Verge. For some listeners on the call, it was a surprising goal. Microsoft had just shut down the Japanese developer Tango Gameworks, which, coming off the small, prestigious hit title, Hi-Fi Rush. Hi-Fi Rush is so baffling. It's baffling that they closed that studio, because it's one of the biggest Xbox hits critically in years. Look, Hellblade 2 might be that, but when that game came out, it took the internet by storm, and people saw it as a sign that Xbox could start making quality IP again, and they just closed the studio. And a lot of people have called it short-sighted, and it doesn't make sense to anybody, I don't think. Internally, externally, we're all just looking at it, scratching our heads. But if all that wasn't enough, there's even more bad news, because it's being reported that the new Perfect Dark game is in rough shape, it's claimed. This one is coming from Jeff Grubb. They said the fallout from this, the layoffs, Been hearing more and more. I've been hearing for years that Perfect Dark is in a rough state. It sounds like it's in a very rough state, he said. And it doesn't sound like it's really come together in a way since then. The game was announced in 2020. And even with Crystal Dynamics on board to help work on that, on top of what Grubb had to say, Alex Donaldson of VG247 added that the game's development has been like pushing a boulder up a steep hill. I have seen some crazy stories about the development of that game. I have not put it in print, but out of respect for a team really trying hard to push a boulder up a steep hill, he said, but my patience is getting thin. Lastly, both Shinobi and the video game historian Liam Robertson corroborated Grubb's initial report on the state of the game. From what little I've heard about the development of the new Perfect Dark, it sounds like a future video in the making, Robertson said. Just a big, protracted mess. Not good news coming about the Perfect Dark game. And this comes at a time when we know that, you know, we have the shot of Phil Spencer playing something when he went to the studio, which basically everybody in the video where they announced that studio, they're all gone. Andy Robson did a huge report about what's going on with Perfect Dark, and he just has a list of employees with lines through them because of how many departures and how much turmoil that particular studio has gone through. And then Tom Warren had a report also about inside Xbox's turmoil. Here's what's going on inside of Xbox right now as employees brace for more cutbacks and uncertainty. It's a pretty damning report, but I highlighted a few of the more important bits. Microsoft has also had internal debates about whether to put new releases of Call of Duty into Game Pass. I understand this is a debate that's been ongoing internally for quite some time, with concerns from some time that revenue that Call of Duty typically generates for Activision Blizzard will be undermined by Game Pass. Now, look, I didn't call Brad, but Brad's post seems to allude to the same question being asked about the strategy. I'm told that Microsoft has also considered increasing the price of Game Pass Ultimate again. These are only considerations, so a final decision could mean we still see a future Call of Duty release appear in most versions of Game Pass. The debate internally reflects the fact that Microsoft's Xbox strategy has shifted from just delivering its games exclusively onto Game Pass to considering bringing more Xbox games to multiple platforms, like obviously Hellblade 2, which I have been very critical about because there's been almost no marketing for the game whatsoever. I just feel like there's an event ongoing right now, and I saw somebody who is the comms director at Xbox make a comment, and I haven't seen much more. They have been too tight-lipped with Hellblade 2 coverage, period, and it's concerning about that IP. Hellblade 2 is set to debut in a matter of weeks on May 21st. I understand Hellblade 2 is another game that Microsoft has been considering for the PS5. Xbox employees are now bracing for what's next, as it seems unlikely that we've seen the last of Microsoft's gaming layoffs and cutbacks. There are whispers among employees that core Xbox game studios are set for cutbacks next. That is terrifying. Core Xbox game studios. Like, there's more coming. I believe it. And like, not just from Microsoft, it's going to be more on the industry. I just can't believe that Xbox is bracing us basically to experience this every quarter. We know that they're going to see another hardware decline, and I imagine to offset that cost, they're going to see more reductions across the board. Microsoft's gaming business isn't growing without Activision Blizzard right now, and how that plays out through 2024 will be key for all Xbox studios. How can you work in an environment where things are just being ripped apart constantly? I don't know. I don't know how to process that. I don't know how internal employees would process that. By the way, a lot of people are like, well, what was the actual impact? Well, there's a layoff tracker that you can follow online where there has to be a notification when there's big layoffs for a lot of companies. And Arkane will lay off 96 employees in Austin, Texas on July 6, 2024, as indicated in a WARN notice. WARN is a law that basically says that they have to do that. So giving you the context that I imagine they could have made a smaller version of Hi-Fi Rush. They could have made a smaller version of Dishonored. If they were told, hey, we have to close your studio, or we will, or you can make a smaller game right now to, you know, tide the weather. I had this reaction, and it's kind of going viral at the moment. So the Xbox plan is to increase the price of Xbox Game Pass, which is likely being discussed, possibly not put Call of Duty on Game Pass, which Brad Hildebrand and Tom Warren seem to be corroborating, to make smaller games that give us prestige and awards, which Hi-Fi Rush 2 and a new Dishonored could have been, but those studios were shut down. Again, my thought would be like they could do what they did with the Prince of Persia series, where they had a side-scrolling Prince of Persia, or they could do a Hitman Go style version of one of those games, a shorter development cycle for a really stylized game, which would give them a little bit of wiggle room to survive the current market that we're all in. And they're getting more people to voluntarily quit and take severance package, meaning less overall experience at the company. Make it make sense. Based on all the reports that I just read you, I am very confused about what the play is here. What's going on, Xbox? Are you okay? What is happening? You're $3 trillion company. You made $26 billion in profit last year. You could give like one billion of that would cover all of this. It doesn't make sense to me. Maybe it makes sense to you. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Hit that subscribe button, hit that bell. I've seen a lot of people talking online about how this isn't true. We went through all the sources and the reporting that has been done about what's been said. So let me know what you think. Thank you so much to the members for supporting the channel. If you want to become a member, you can click that join button right down there. If you want to support the channel, I do need to update this list. Thank you so much for supporting everybody who has supported ever on the membership side. If you want to see the report from yesterday about what has been going on, just check it out right here. Bye for now, everybody.